Rico, getting ready for CBS This Morning. I think we hit somewhere around 7:11 this morning, talking about the massive protests that are planned for today. Upwards of 1 million people are expected to demonstrate here. It's something of an island-wide strike. Many people will take off work. Many businesses are actually closing to allow their employees to go and participate. If you haven't been following the Puerto Rico story, let me sort of give you the cliff notes in the simplest version. About a week and a half ago, there were some chats that leaked, chats that involved the governor and 11 of his associates, chats that were profane, misogynistic, homophobic, racist, and in the eyes of many people here, contained elements that amount to corruption. For a lot of people, it was the final straw. The final straw in what has been decades of doubt, decades of suspicion, and decades of disappointment that the Puerto Rican people have felt for their government. Hurricane Maria, which happened 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, was one of the lowest points for people living here on the island and, quite frankly, for Puerto Ricans living abroad. But the chat messages were the final straw, as many people have told us, because what it did was it validated the suspicion that a lot of people had. The governor of Puerto Rico has already acknowledged that the chats are valid. He has called them shameful, and he has apologized. This morning, you're going to hear some of what the governor said yesterday. I'll give you a little heads up. He basically said he was going to do a couple of things in hopes, we think, that it would appease people and maybe satisfy protesters, but he declared that he was not going to leave office. And when he did that, I got to tell you, I actually sent out, I think the first thing I did was send out a tweet saying, breaking news, the governor of Puerto Rico says he will not leave office. The reaction was so swift. I think even this morning when I looked on my Twitter, there was like more than 1,000 comments. And I have not read all of them, but those that I have read, the majority, every single one of them I've read, has said it's not enough. He has to go. This is not satisfying. The governor has been accused of being somewhat tone deaf, carrying on as if business is as usual, when hundreds of thousands of people have protested over the last week. And again, today, you have artists like Residente and Ricky Martin and others who are going to be joining ordinary Puerto Ricans who will take off of work today, millennials who are out of school, college students who are out of class, who will all converge, and they're aiming to actually shut down one of the busiest highways in San Juan. The major mall is actually going to be closed today. The governor is losing political support almost at every turn. The resident commissioner, who basically represents the island in Washington, doesn't have a voting power, but is essentially the congresswoman there. She has called for the governor to step down, and she's a part of the governor's party. There have been so many resignations of the governor's cabinet. Chief among them in terms of interest was his number 2, the Secretary of State, who is also the Lieutenant Governor and would take over if the governor resigned. That guy left. He resigned because he was caught up in the chat scandal. So right now there is no replacement for the governor. Sure, there is a line of succession, but the woman who would actually take over is not well liked in the government. So there's some thought that the reason the governor hasn't appointed a number 2 is he's sort of holding out and sort of keeping his critics at bay, because the critics, even though they may want the governor to go, don't want the woman who would take over, a woman named Wanda Velasquez, who is the Attorney General, essentially, for the island. So it's a bit of a political mess, but there have been so many people working directly with the government, working directly with the governor, who have resigned before the chat scandal started and after the chats were leaked. So anyway, this has been trending a lot on social media, generating a lot of interest. There have been protests, and I'll say this and then I gotta go. The protests that Puerto Ricans have done have been quite clever. They protested skydiving. They protested scuba diving. They protested paddleboarding, kayaking. They did yoga in front of the governor's mansion in a sign of protest. There were so many just clever ways of showing their disdain for this governor and calling for him to resign. It's worth reinforcing. I've tried to say it as many times as possible. 99% of the protests over the almost 2-week period that it's been ongoing have been peaceful. Absolutely peaceful. Sure, there's been a handful of protesters and agitators who have thrown water bottles and rocks at police, and that provoked the police. The police moved in with tear gas. It happened on at least 2 different nights, 2 different occasions, but it was a handful of people. The vast majority, everybody has been incredibly united in their message that the governor must go. So we hope you'll join us for all of CTM, CBS This Morning, but specifically we'll see you on or about 7/11. Have a good day. Happy Monday.